So Josh, we think about 20 years of war in Afghanistan, and a lot of people are saying, yes, this was a military failure. But from your reporting, that's not the whole story, right?
No, it's not, absolutely. I mean, one of the things we have to realize is that a really big part of this war, maybe even the heart of it in some ways, was the civilian mission. It was all of these reconstruction and development projects with the goal of creating a sustainable and functioning society that Afghans could be proud of, that they wanted to be part of. And then ultimately, the mission there, the dream, and this was said quite explicitly, was if we can do this, if we can build schools and hospitals and roads and government institutions and an army that functions, then we can go home. So in some ways, the whole withdrawal debacle that we're seeing, the root of it isn't necessarily just decisions made in the last few weeks or months. It's failures of this broader civilian mission over the last decade.
So give me some specifics. I mean, hospitals were built, schools were built, roads were built. How did that fail?
Oh my God. I mean, if I had an hour, I could give you 100 examples, and that's kind of the problem. One thing that I think about a lot is a roads project that they started doing in 2008, 2009. The USAID and the State Department invested $400 million in a project that was supposed to build 1,200 miles of roads across the country. Cut to 3 years later, they've built 100 miles of road, and they spent more than $200 million, more than half of the money.
Oh, wow.
It's not just roads. You can see this in schools. You know, there are schools that were built and then shut down within a year. Schools that never had a single student in them, despite some reporting up the chain that they did. And hospitals that were either built in places where they didn't need a hospital or built and they were so expensive to operate and they required all this machinery and they just couldn't be sustained. And so many of those projects have collapsed. I think it's easy to look at those examples and think, oh, those must be anomalies.
Yeah.
I think there's a temptation to do that. But if you look at the reports that the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction have put out, that looks at $8 billion worth of reconstruction money that the US spent since 2008, like 7.8 billion exactly, to see what the state of that was. And they found that only $1.2 billion worth of that money, those projects were still being done the way they were supposed to. The rest of it, who really knows?
Wow, and that's US taxpayer money.
Yes, US taxpayer money, and frankly, don't forget, Afghans in these villages, you know, where they see a big hospital come in and they get a big State Department presentation, or they see the press release that we're investing $100 million to build a road here, and then 2 years later they drive down and it's filled with potholes. That was my experience when I went to Afghanistan in 2012, talking to people who say, we saw what you said this road cost, and we see this road. And they look at that, and that shakes their faith in the promise of non-corrupt democracy that we're bringing in their own government.
Can you just call that corruption, this sort of failure?
Yeah, I think corruption was a part of it, for sure. The reality is that these projects, yes, some of them did get brought down through corruption, whether it was legalized corruption through the way our contracting system works, or genuine corruption that we failed to root out in Afghanistan. At the same time, a lot of these projects created corruption. The other thing that I think about when I look back at all this is that even when these projects worked the way they were supposed to, they often didn't result in the outcome that we intended for them. In fact, USAID did a study looking at a series of projects that had been relatively successful, not over budget, not corrupt, and actually did what they were supposed to. And they found in a lot of these villages, people there didn't credit the US for it, they didn't credit the Afghan government for it, they credited the Taliban for it.
Wow. Well, that's just mind-blowing. For people trying to ingest all this information very quickly, what is the takeaway here?
We know we can build a hospital. We know, in fact, with a sustained presence, that we can improve literacy in a society. We can reduce maternal mortality. We can have all of these good effects. But I don't know that enough people have asked questions about whether we can make those things be lasting. It's actually the heart of this operation, is how do you do something that's lasting?
Thank you, Josh.